us at the School for Health and Care Radicals, welcome to Module 3, Rolling with Resistance. It's great to see so many familiar names that have joined, and really fantastic that there are so many new people here as well. So please do enjoy the session. Just to remember, the school is part of and leads up to NHS Change Day, which is on the 3rd of March. That's actually only 17 days away, and just before this session started, I had a quick check, and we have just under 100,000 pledges on the Change Day website, which is fantastic. So I'm going to hand over to Helen Bevan now. Helen's going to take us through some introductory slides, and then she's going to take us well into the content of Module 3. So I hope you have a great session.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Module 3. So, like as Liz said, the reason why we're running the School for Health and Care Radicals is as part of the run-up to NHS Change Day, and to help our change agents in health and care to have the skills and the knowledge and the confidence for making change. But in a sense, it's the reason why we exist at NHS Change Day. So one of the things that we wanted to say this morning is that we really want everybody to join the campaign that we've set up. So if you go onto the website for NHS Change Day, you can see it here, changeday.nhs.uk. If you go up into the top right-hand corner, it's the School for Health and Care Radicals, and look for the campaign page. And we've actually got our own campaign, and what we want is everybody who's part of the school, we'd love you to join our pledge. So if you haven't done so already, 110 people have joined, but there's lots of people with us today who haven't joined our campaign, and we'd love you to pledge. And at the end, Liz, who's chairing today, will be taking you through some more ideas for pledging for the School for Health and Care Radicals. I think that one of the things about this whole experience of the School for Health and Care Radicals has been the way that everybody's connecting and the real sense of community. And in the first 2 modules, there's been a real sense of that, and we want that to continue. So please use the chat box to keep contributing continuously during this web seminar. If you've got some resources you want to share, a comment you want to make, please do that. And we're also very active on Twitter, and it's really wonderful the number of tweets we're seeing. So those of you that can multitask, as well as putting comments in the chat box, can you also tweet? And we're using the Change Day hashtag and also our own hashtag, which is SHCRChat. What we'll also be doing is we'll be producing, as well as the recording of today, we'll be providing other kinds of summaries using Storify and Pinterest, and those will go on the website. And our twice-weekly newsletter, Naomi's News, will have details of those. And obviously, we have an hour and a half a week where we're talking with each other, and we want that to continue. So we also have the live chat forum, and please carry on the conversation there. As Liz said, this is number 3 of our 5 modules. Our first module was about change starting with me. Last week we looked at alliances for change, and our topic this time is about rolling with resistance. And we'll start the session shortly. Then next week we're going to look at some very practical approaches around making change happen. And then finally we're going to have a future focus session on moving beyond the edge. Just to say, we're so thrilled at the school statistics because nobody's ever done anything like the School for Health and Care Radicals before, and we didn't know, what the impact and the interaction would be. And, it's continued to be strong. So currently we have 1,234 people signed up as learners. We're putting all our materials on SlideShare, and we've had over 5,500 shares on SlideShare. In terms of our tweets, we've had over 3,000 now, and our reach is about 5 million. So, we really want things to stay active, and please keep it coming. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, rolling rolling with resistance. The reason we're focusing on this topic is because we talk to so many of you who are change agents in health and social care, and the feedback that we get is it's really, really difficult sometimes, because I can see how things need to change, but people around me can't. How do I deal with resistance? So what we're going to cover in the next hour and a half is, first of all, just some ideas about what do we actually mean by resistance to change. And we're also going to look at some different approaches, because based on what we think resistance is and the nature of resistance, the interventions that we take and what we do as change agents will change. We're going to talk about diversity. Diversity is such a key topic for change agents generally, and in the context of resistance, I think there is a critical relationship. I'm going to share with you one of my favourite models around rolling with resistance, which is about impact and intent. We're then going to have a really great little case study. So Maxine Craig, who is one of the leading practitioners of organisational development in the NHS, is going to tell us her story about rolling with resistance. We're then going to share a particular model that we like to help people through change, which is the stages of change or trans-theoretical change model. A number of you have agreed to take part in our panel discussion later on, and we're really looking forward to that. And finally, we will have some key questions to reflect on and the call to action. So let's start off by thinking about, resistance to change. Okay, what does resistance mean? And the actual kind of technical definition is any force that stops or slows movement. So, in our context, I guess we're talking about movement towards a particular goal or outcomes, or something that we want for our patients or our community. So anything that gets in the way of us being able to deliver that is resistance. Now, I'm just going to go forward. The way that we think about resistance and the way that we deal with it, I think can vary a lot. And I just put this quote in here from Marcia Senator, and she says, "Change can either challenge or threaten us. That our beliefs as change agents pave the way to success or block us." So again, in the context of resistance, what we're saying here is the way that we think about resistance, what resistance to change is. Okay, that mindset will determine what our actions are as change agents when it comes to working with or dealing with or rolling with resistance. So let's look at some of the mindsets around resistance to change. Now, what I want to do now is to contrast two different ways of thinking about resistance to change. And this comes from the evidence base around organisational development, OD. And one of the kind of leading development directions in OD is to think about different ways of thinking about change. And are we thinking about and going about change in a diagnostic way or a dialogic way? And what we've done in the study guide is that we've provided some really nice references for those of you who might want to think and reflect and learn further about these different approaches. And to get a clue about the difference between diagnostic and dialogic approaches to change, we've got a quote here from Robert Marshak, and he says, "Language constructs our worlds rather than reports the objective facts about the world. Therefore, changing when, where, what, how, and which people talk about things, changing the conversation, will lead to organisational change." So we can kind of get a clue from that a dialogic approach to change might be one that involves conversation and language and the way it changes our world. So let's just look at this. So, a diagnostic approach to change, if we take a diagnostic approach, it means that we look at resistance in a particular way. Okay. So what we'd say is that in this context, change is something that happens out there in the organisational system. So we want to change the pathway for frail older people, or we want to change our system to create integrated care. So if you like, it's like an external reality. It's like something out there in the system that we want to change. And therefore, resistance is anything that gets in the way of that change that we're trying to achieve. So if you like, resistance can have a very negative connotation from this perspective, because it's a force to overcome. So we've got this goal for our patients. So we want a different pathway for people with dementia coming into hospital, and that's the change we want. That's our change goal. So anything that gets in the way of that is resistant to that is preventing change. So if we're a change agent and we have a diagnostic mindset, then what we need to do is first of all diagnose the problem. Okay, so what's going wrong, and then we have to manage or overcome that resistance. Okay, so in a sense, there's an external reality out there with a very clear goal, and what we're trying to do as change agents is stop anything that's getting in the way of us achieving that goal. So in that context, when people have got a mindset that's like a diagnostic approach to change, then people that are resistors, sometimes we will put labels on them, such as laggards, blockers, or in denial, because these are the resistors that are getting in the way. And I can remember very, very early on in my change career in the National Health Service in England, I led a very big organisation-wide change programme in a hospital. And I sat down with the chief executive, and we had a list of every consultant in the hospital, every medical specialist, and we gave them all a score depending on how resistant they were to change. So in a sense, it wasn't anything to do with the slightly suspect nature of our change programme as far as we were concerned. It was about them being resistors. Now, if we look at most of the literature that is available to us as change agents about resistance to change, it's 90% of it is written from a diagnostic point of view, and look at the language. It's about how do we overcome resistance to change, how do we manage resistance. And at the top here we can see this diagram, which I think is pretty typical of the kind of things that we see around change processes that people go through, and in a sense we have to take people through a resistance phase, and it's kind of a part of a change. On this corner here we've got the resistance to change grid, and we diagnose, we analyse resistance, and then we take steps to overcome it. So if we're thinking as change agents in a diagnostic way, what do we need to do? And this article here is written very classically from a diagnostic viewpoint, and the author here says the role of the change agent is to recognise the causes of resistance and address each one. If this is not done, then the change will be much harder to implement successfully and may not succeed at all. So again, it's this mindset that says this is the change we're trying to achieve. We've got to diagnose, analyse and deal with anything that gets in the way of that change that we're trying to achieve. So let's contrast that with a dialogic approach to change. And we start from a different place, okay? And when we're thinking dialogically, what we say is that actually reality is socially constructed. So in a sense, people make their own reality. And I have a reality because of who I am in the world and my own situation, and other people have got their own reality as well, and we pull it together socially. And the actual changes that we're bringing about come from conversations that actually transform the way we think. And the way that we go about change when we're trying to work dialogically are about involving more people and different people in change discussions, altering how people engage with each other and which people engage. So last week we talked, for instance, about weak ties as well as strong ties. Okay, so if we want to get different people connecting who wouldn't connect before and having different kinds of conversation, and also by stimulating some different different viewpoints to shape how people think about things. So if I can have conversations and dialogues with people that are different to me and have different viewpoints, actually we will end up with better change. So from this viewpoint, resistance is it's inevitable, because if we've got a complex change process that involves a lot of different people and people have got diverse views, then it's inevitable that we're gonna have resistance. So in this context, we should be embracing it and working with it, because it's absolutely inevitable. And in fact, because we're trying to work in diverse ways and bring many more people on board, it's something that we're actually creating. So if we think dialogically about resistance, you know, what is our role as a change agent? And it's a very different thing. Okay, it's about first of all, how we can create the conditions where people can have different kinds of conversations. And our role is to ask questions that are focused on, you know, how might the future be? Thinking very deliberately about how we can engage, you know, other people, different viewpoints. So, you know, can we engage our patients and our communities in ways that we haven't before? Can we bring people from other industries or other contexts who may have something to share with us, and being welcoming to everybody? And also, it's about creating opportunities for everybody to express their views, to find opportunities and build on each other's ideas. And again, it's about, in terms of what we were talking about last week, you know, creating community, enable people to reflect together, and to, if you like, because we create our own reality and we socially construct it, that rather than the reality be out there, we're actually making the reality through our conversations. And people tend to be in one camp or the other, but I think as change agents, and particularly in healthcare, we should be thinking about them both. And this brings us into the issue about diversity, because, you know, if we take the diagnostic approach to change, you know, we want to manage and overcome and deal with resistance to change. But if we take a dialogic approach, then actually we want to bring more people into the conversation and embrace it. So I think it's very important how we think about diversity. And again, in the study guides this week, there are some super resources for thinking about diversity and reflecting on it. And again, you know, in the past, very often when we thought about diversity, we think it's about having a diverse workforce that reflects that reflects the community, and that is important. But, you know, I think this quote here from Idris Moore's really nice. You know, how do we build an innovation culture? Okay, by embracing diversity, attracting, retaining a workforce that looks different, works differently, dressed differently, maybe it's got different kinds of orientation. And before we start bringing in external management consultants and rethinking our innovation processes, we just have to understand that there's no process of innovation and change that works without true diversity. And without true diversity, we might get a very nice change process without very much resistance, but how effective will it actually be? So we as radicals in health and care have to be champions of diversity, you know, and it says here, you know, leaders and organisations must let go of the idea that there's one right way of doing change and one right way or set of methods for overcoming resistance. And instead what we need to do is we need to focus on creating a culture for learning where people feel accepted, they can contribute ideas and actively seek to learn from each other. And that is why, in terms of the title of the module this week, we've talked about rolling with resistance. We haven't talked about overcoming resistance or managing or dealing with resistance. We've talked about rolling with it, and that's a very, very deliberate language. So just going to stop for a couple of minutes and just see to put some things in the chat box. You know, what are some of the implications of embracing that diversity in our change efforts? And if we're going to work with more diverse teams and, you know, bring more people in and work in a more dialogic way, what are some of the skills and perspectives that we need as health and care radicals? So yeah, let's get some feedback on that. Let's see what we can put in the chat box. That's great. We're getting some really good really good feedback.
We're liking the flak jacket comment, Helen.
Yeah.
Wearing a flak jacket to your team is essential.
Yeah. That's great. So, should we just get, should we use this as a pause point at the moment? So, on the line we have Tony, who is monitoring our tweet chat. So, what are you hearing this morning, Tony? What are some of the big themes that are coming across? Are you there? Hi, Tony.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, Tony. Hi. So, tell us what's happening on the Twitter sphere.
On the Twitter sphere, well, apart from the initial outpouring of love for all other radicals that came through it because it was February the 14th and Valentine's Day, which I thought was a very nice cultural shift. So what we're seeing is, I think, lots of comments that are suggesting the building of a community, people starting to understand that we're all here for the same reason. And that then moved into a very nice series of tweets and discussions about how we need to change culture and beliefs, and how the example that you gave and the line that you were working along from moving from diagnostic to dialogic models of change really brings in the need for communication between all of us and for communities.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That's fantastic. And in terms of what we have in the chat, and particularly some of the themes we got back there, Liz, are you with us? Can we hear from you?
Yeah, I'm here, Helen. Yeah, there's a number of things that are coming through on chat. Just like Tony and the Twitter, a high level of affection between everybody, which is really nice. Lots of energy and enthusiasm. Again, people are using chat for some very practical, technical questions, and it has been great to see so many people solving each other's problems. Another thing that's coming through again from like previous weeks is lots of great resources being signposted. So just to remind everybody, we do transcribe the chat, and we'll be able to synthesize all of those and add them to the study guide for the end of the final module. Very high levels of energy around the dialogic approach, and lots of comments and discussion around the issue of perception. And what's been interesting for me, because I'm monitoring chats, and although I'm a multitasker and pretty good at this stuff, I can't go onto Twitter at the same time. But I can see through chats that people are obviously posting lots of stuff, particularly images, on Twitter, particularly around the issue of diversity. And that's something that after this programme I will be going to have a look at myself.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Liz. And it's interesting to me because one of the lines of chat that's in the chat box is about enabling diversity through recruitment, and because we like to kind of put a few provocative things in the study guide. And one of the things that we've put in the study guide, one of the references, actually the first one, is by Stowe Boyd, which is actually about the problem of recruiting for values and cultural fit, because actually by recruiting for values, the danger is we end up with people like us, and we don't end up with diversity. So it's a really good one to read. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about intention and impact. And there's like kind of lots of models that we can use, or ways of thinking. But for me, this is I think it's so simple. Intention and impact, but it's so effective. And just had a quote here, actually being able to be effective as a change agent is not about intention, i.e. I intend to be a great change agent and I intend to make some great things happen. It's a matter of impact, and it's about so my intent when I'm putting an idea across has to go through the filter of how well I communicate. And then it has to go through the filter of the way in which the person that's receiving it is impacting on it. And I think that there are some really big issues amongst NHS leaders, and I really put my hand up here about intent and impact. And because basically what we might want to do is our intent in taking an action or saying a particular thing is to make one thing happen, but the impact it has on other people is very different. So this is a scenario here, and this is about me. So, I'm behaving in a certain way because, the people who work in the team with me, I want to be really giving them quick answers, enabling them to do their work faster and get on with the next thing. So I'm kind of helping them by being, helping them with problem solving. But actually I'm not helping them with problem solving, because the impact of my behaviours and my action is that people become very dependent on me, and they don't know how to solve their own problems. And so actually my style, even though my intention is really good, the impact of my behaviour and the things I do is actually getting in the way. And again, in the context of the School for Health and Care Radicals, when we talked about the big issue about people feeling that they have to have permission for change, I think there's a lot going on around intent and impact, because I think that the behaviours of many of us as leaders is not to make people feel that they can't do a thing without permission, but that's the impact it's having on our colleagues and our teams. And I think it kind of comes back to the dialogic theme again. That when we're trying to get across our ideas for change, or trying to make a change process happen, we have to think very deeply about ourselves and how we're interacting at the world. And are we actually talking at people, at our colleagues, because we're really trying to get across a message for change and win them to it? And actually, how can we change to be truly, talking to people and with people, not at people? And, some of the things I think that we need to really be thinking about as change agents, how can I build an environment for work that is trusting and supported? Because having one transformational dialogic conversation ain't going to change the world. That actually, if we've got an environment and we can create a culture which is trusting and it feels safe, then it's much more likely to happen. How can we truly listen, both with an open heart, so hearing people's energy, getting a sense of values and emotion, and an open mind, being open to other possibilities? How can I fully commit to the change? Because the change I might be leading isn't one that I've come up with myself, but that the organisation's asked me to lead, or other people have asked me to lead. And if I'm not role modelling, being fully committed to that change all the time, then I'm not being authentic. How can I, in those kind of conversations, find common purpose and common interests with other people? Being a great change agent isn't about program plans and taking action and keeping everything on track. Well, it might be those things, but it's also about taking time to really build relationships. It's about being open with my intent. So when I'm, in dialogue, being really clear about what my intention is, and checking that back with other people in terms of impact. And finally, it's about taking responsibility for my own action. So I think there's an awful lot that we can do as individuals. And we know, how we go about change processes are so important. People will support what they help create. So if people are involved in the change process right from the beginning, then they are much more likely to, feel part of the change, accept different perspectives, and see other people's realities. So final slide that I wanted to show in this section is a Cherokee proverb. And about a year ago I had a conversation with Don Berwick because of changes that I was going through, and I said, what's your advice to me, Don? And he said, don't be a martyr. And I think it's really wise advice, because, sometimes we're so focused on a particular change and making it happen, and yet the environment around us might not be right for that change. And another key thing as change agents is yes, about, being resilient and going with the flow and pushing the change forward. But sometimes the change just isn't going to be right and isn't going to be happening, and we shouldn't be martyring ourselves. So I'll show you this Cherokee quote because I really like it. If your horse dies, get off it. And what we mean by that is, if the environment's not right, if the circumstances aren't such that we can, enable the change, if we can't fully commit to it, we may need to get off our horse. So that's the end of the first section, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Maxine to hear her story, and Maxine's going to be supported and facilitated in a conversation following the story with Pip Hardy from our team. So Maxine, can we hear you?
Hello, good morning, everybody.
Yeah, can hear you loud and clear. What I'm going to do now, Maxine, is I'm going to go on to your first slide.
Okay, good morning, everybody. The team asked me to share with you my own experience of becoming a change agent and my own experience of resistance. So it is a very personal story, which I hope will resonate with people. So I joined the NHS when I was 17 as an auxiliary nurse, whilst I waited to undertake nurse training here in the northeast of England. Being a nurse was all I ever wanted to be, and I found that I found a new family in the NHS. I found a place that was inspirational and continues to be inspirational to me, and I found a way of contributing to the world that I never ever anticipated. The NHS became and still is central in my life. As a young nurse, as this picture shows you, I think I was getting my actual qualification badge at this point in this photograph. As a young nurse and a ward sister, I saw resistance through my view of the world that was really about competition. And when I've reflected on this, I think it comes from, I did do a lot of sport, and I think my view of the world was quite black and white at that time, and it was all about winning and losing. And I only stood in my own shoes. Once I'd researched a situation and come to my own conclusion about how the world should look, then I believed that my role was to work with the good guys. Next slide. Next slide, please, Helen. Yeah, my job was to work with the good guys. So for me, at this point in my career, things fell into two groups. There was the good guys who were with me, who wanted to do the change. Next slide. Or those that were against me. And I think for quite a while I actually worked in that format, really. You can put the next slide up, Helen, thanks. And then as I grew more mature and I studied and I did more education, I think that it was the educational processes that helped my worldview about resistance begin to change. And this change in me is probably best illustrated about a story of my grandfather. I never met my grandfather. He died before I was born. He was a chief officer in the British Merchant Navy, and the official records tell me he was a hero. He was taken prisoner by the Japanese during World War II. And we have his diary from that time that he wrote when he was in the Japanese prisoner of war camps. And in those diaries, he shares with us via his story, the story of guards who gave the prisoners extra food. And you have to remember, as this image suggests to us, these people were starving. They were literally starving to death. So these guards decided in a very surreptitious way that they would try and get additional food to some of the prisoners. And my grandfather was one of those prisoners that they actually gave additional food to. And obviously that was a very risky act. If they were caught, they would have been shot for subordination. And for me, finding the story of my grandfather in the diaries cemented all the research about resistance being a perspective rather than a position. And the guards were kind to my grandfather. They were humane and they showed him compassion. They tried to keep him alive. However, at the same time as whilst they were doing that, they were disobeying orders. They weren't following the rules, and they were endangering the order of the camp. This reflection, and it's obviously a very personal experience for me, made me realise that resistance is always about where you stand in relation to the change or the action. And there's always going to be two views of it, and neither view makes sense to the other groups within that change process. Moving on a little bit to my sort of recent career, I spend a lot of my time in the NHS, both in my home organisation of South Tees in Middlesbrough, but I also spend a couple of days a week working around the rest of the NHS, and I spend my time working with really great people who find themselves and their teams find themselves in tricky and difficult situations. My most recent learning about resistance has happened in the last couple of years, really. I was working with a team, one of our teams in South Tees, who had fallen into difficulty. And this team was failing to deliver the required standard of care to patients and families, and it was failing to be a happy and effective place to be a member of staff in. When we investigated this, we found we used a dialogue approach, a narrative approach. Every member of staff participated in 1 hour of storytelling with me. So we had at the time 50 hours of narrative about this ward and what it was like to be a member of staff within that ward. Building on the narrative work, we realised and began to understand that this ward had been in difficulties for probably over 10 years. They'd had 4 ward managers in 8 years, and it was a really unhappy place to be, and it was quite an unsafe place for patients to be. Not every day, not every shift, but it wasn't consistently high quality care. The ward was really busy. It's a ward that cares for some of our most vulnerable patients at South Tees, and it had a long history of poor morale. We did a piece of work as part of our listening exercise, and our working with staff to gather their stories. And the staff told us, 93% of the staff working on that ward told us that the care wasn't good enough for their family. And I just want you to stop for a minute and imagine what it feels like as a change agent when 93% of staff tell you that care on that ward is not good enough for their family. So I and many others worked with this team for over 18 months, and things got better, but they didn't get consistently better. They still continued to be up and down. And when I say work for 18 months, we were in there literally every day, doing interventions, training interventions, coaching interventions, supervision interventions. We had senior nurses working with people, shadowing people, working alongside of them. We did everything I knew how to do. After 18 months, we had another serious untoward incident, and I was personally devastated. I'd done everything I knew how to do. We'd applied all the skill and knowledge of over 30 years of experience, and having considered long and hard, I recommended that we should consider closing the ward. My wise colleague, she was then our Director of Nursing, Tricia Hart, was also bereft. We regrouped, and she told us to take some time overnight and consider our opinions, and to regroup in the morning and think about what we could do. This was a really dark time for me. I couldn't explain the stubbornness of the team dynamic. I felt I was letting everybody down. Moving forward, I knew I had to find a bridge to a different way of dealing with what people may call resistance. We had to create a different way of movement, and we had to create more depth. So in this dark time, I began to research other approaches that I'd never considered before, and I found the work of Kagan and Leahy that you can see on the slide in front of you, and I would commend that work to you. It's a very different way of thinking about ourselves and the way we hold ourselves in patterns of behaviour with our habits that hold us in sometimes behaviour that isn't appropriate. And the example I usually use with the teams is Kagan and Leahy talk about competing commitments, that we can want something really badly and understand the rational sense of that situation, but we can act in a way that goes against the goal we actually seek for ourselves. So the example I usually use with the teams in South Tees is, you can be trying to lose 7 pounds of weight and have a really bad day, and you've stuck to your diet all day, and on your way home you drive past McDonald's. You've still got that goal of losing 7 pounds, but you drive into McDonald's and you buy the Big Mac and you eat it. And that behaviour at that point in time, feeling really stressed at the end of a busy day, makes perfect sense, even though it works against your goal. This model unlocked for us a whole range of interventions that we now use in South Tees. We designed and built in South Tees, which have been phenomenal in terms of improving things. And we've linked you to some of the stories that the staff have told and worked with Pip Hardy in terms of what they found through this process. So my final input this morning is, last slide please, is to tell you about my level of resistance now. Today, as I sit here, we've just bought a new house, my husband and I. We're not actually living in it because my husband's deconstructing it more and more each day. But one of my jobs in this deconstruction process is to decide what colour the walls have to be. And I found something really important about myself, is I can't get over my resistance to painting my houses cream. Every time I try and be brave and think I'll have a nice aubergine colour or a nice navy blue and I'll have a feature wall, I go back to B&Q and I look along all the pots of cream paint and I talk about the warm creams and I talk about the cool creams, and I decide on a nice colour last week called daffodil white. I hope that's been of some help to you all.
Maxine, thank you so much for that. There have been loads of comments in the chat box about how emotionally connected people felt to your story. And although I prepared some questions to ask you, I actually think you've mostly answered them. But I guess really the final question I wanted to maybe to ask you about was really in relation to Ward 14 and what's happened as a result of your efforts, because I think you've told us quite a bit about the different tack you took in terms of dealing, well, not dealing, but rolling with their resistance. But so what's actually happened? Tell us what's happened to Ward 14.
They have won awards. They've won national awards, and they have won our local awards for their changing culture. They've always been a delight to work with. But they're more so now. They are inspiring. When I'm feeling that I need a little bit of burst of energy, I go to that ward and I sit and drink tea with them and their patients. We've done, as you know, a big intervention collecting their stories at this end of the change when they're hugely successful and a shining light in our organisation. And they've been both sobering and inspiring. They continue to lead the way really in our organisation and to shine a beacon nationally that, you know, poor care can occur for a number of reasons, and I'm happy to share papers with people if people want to email me that we've got on that intervention. But I think the biggest thing for me that they've achieved is they're proud about what they've done.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There's been a question actually in the chat about whether the Ward 14 people are able to do training for other people and share their experiences and what they've learned. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, some of them do already. They help us. Some of them quietly mentor. Some people actually felt that they couldn't stay on that ward and they asked us to help them find a place of recovery, and we've done that. And some people have found new careers out of that place of recovery and have changed tack completely. And we continue to try and bring them in to the work we do with other teams in difficulty. They go out and speak nationally on this now, and that's been a great help to us all and a great development opportunity for them. But first and foremost, these people love that ward they work on, and they want to do that job every day, so we can't take them away all the time. They get lots of visitors as well now, and that's really good, and the care is outstanding.
Well, and I can imagine they're incredibly hospitable to their visitors as well. So just before we finish, Maxine, do you have any, I don't know, top tips, any 3 things that you might suggest to other radicals that could help them to bring about the kinds of changes that have been accomplished on Ward 14?
I think even just preparing for this session made me realise that the value of reflection, personal reflection as a change agent, is really important throughout your career. I've been in the service over 32 years, and I think it's about putting your story together. You know, and the bits that I've done for this piece have helped me as well. I keep a journal. I would recommend and give people a tip to keep a journal and look back and reflect on that. My second tip would be about always being on top of the evidence bases and making sure that you're scanning the horizons and try things out. You don't need to wait for somebody to design a methodology. Have a go, small cycles, PDSA cycles, and learn from that and keep that in with your reflective cycle. And my final tip would be you've got to keep your humility.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Maxine. I think people have really appreciated your sharing of your personal story and really modelling your suggestions in personally reflecting and knowing yourself. So thanks ever so much. I'm going to hand back to Helen now.
Thank you. So, I mean, wasn't that just like a wonderful kind of reinforcement of some of those principles from earlier? And just think about the implications for us as change agents in health and care. That, you know, we live in a world that typically has a very diagnostic view of change. And, you know, so much of our work is about how do we hit the goal, how do we set up the program, how do we manage these work streams for change. And when you listen to Maxine's story there, you know, thinking about you know, how conversations and stories really can change the world, but actually taking that very dialogic, that very narrative, that very story-based approach to change, you know, needs very different, and I think additional skills in a health service context. So Maxine mentioned there the importance of models, and again she talked about the Keegan and Leahy model, and how that model, if you like, gave her and colleagues a perspective that just gave it a completely different lens and a sense of ways forward. And like Maxine, I'm a very big believer in models and frameworks and theories for change, and I think that, you know, they don't work for everybody, or the same ones don't work for everybody, but, you know, where we can find a kind of connection and an insight, they can be really very powerful. So maybe one way I'd put it is to take this quote from the statistician George Box, and he says, essentially all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And what I want to do as my final contribution this morning is to show you a model that I know many of you know already, that I think that when it comes to, you know, thinking about resistance and truly understanding what's going on, helps me greatly. And it's this model. And it's a model that comes from health-related behaviour change, and it's called the Stages of Change model. The technical title of it is the Trans-Theoretical Model of Behaviour Change, and it comes from Francesca De Clemente and Norcross. And you know, the kind of premise of this model is that when we're thinking about change and other people that we're interacting with in a situation of change, it's very helpful to think about where that person is with regard to the change process. So I'll just say something a little bit about it first in the background, and then I'll go on and I'll just take us through the 5 stages very quickly. So, you know, one of the reasons I use this model a lot is because many clinical colleagues are already familiar with it and are using it around health-related behaviours. So it's used very extensively for things like, you know, helping people give up smoking, to adopt exercise, you know, weight control, how to avoid McDonald's, HIV prevention, compliance with medication, and so on and so on. But what we found with this model is that it works really well for service and organisational change too. So what I want to do is just take you through it in the context of one of these examples, which is smoking cessation. So basically what we're trying to do here is to help an individual to change behaviour. And the first stage is pre-contemplation. And when I'm pre-contemplative, I've got no recognition or interest in the change at all. So obviously, in our example here of smoking, you know, I'm happily smoking away. I'm not really aware that my smoking is a problem, and I'm really not thinking about smoking. Okay. The next stage on is contemplation. And when I'm contemplative, I've moved my thinking on, so I'm starting to recognise now that my smoking is a problem, and I'm starting to think I might want to stop, but I haven't got any actual plans yet. And often when I'm at contemplative stage, I switch between yes I will, no I won't, quite often. The next stage is called preparation, and at this point I've decided I'm going to do it. So I'm going to give up smoking on the 1st of April, and I'm now cutting down, and I'm reading, and I'm preparing, and I'm going to join a group of other smokers that are giving up. So I'm making plans and changing things that I do in preparation. The next stage is action. I've actually taken the action. I've adopted the new habit. Yes, I have stopped smoking. And the fifth stage is maintenance. And when I'm at maintenance stage, I'm still continuing not to smoke. And obviously sometimes I go to the pub at night, and when I have a nice glass of wine, I really want to have a cigarette, but I'm managing to not smoke. So the theory behind the stages of change is that what we should be doing is to recognise where an individual is when it comes to change, and what we should be doing as change agent is helping that person move to the next stage. Now, a key aspect here is that people will only move one stage at a time. So if I'm pre-contemplative, then what I can do as the next stage is move to contemplation. I can't move straight from pre-contemplation to action. So let's kind of reflect on some questions at the moment, and we can maybe put some answers in the chat box. When you think about the kind of change activities that we're involved in health and care, and the way that many of our organisations go about their change activities, which of these 5 stages is most of our effort at? Okay. And the second question is, what's the reality of where people are actually at? So, you know, where typically are we designing all our change activities, at which stage? But what's the reality of where people are at? Okay, so let's see what we think. Just pop some answers in the chat box, and Liz, we'll get you to say to give us a summary of what people are saying. Just wait about another 30 seconds. Great. Okay. So so Liz, what's your sense of what people are saying?
Everything, actually. A lot of 3 to 5, 1 to 2. There's huge. It was really interesting for me that there's such a usually with these things there's huge consensus. There hasn't been at all. So it bounced pretty much around the whole circle. Yeah.
Great, and that's a good thing, because it means we're thinking about it. But you know, in terms of, like, I know it's a gross generalisation, but in overall terms, I agree with Dan Walsh, who was the last person there in the chat box, and he basically said most of our efforts are in action, when the reality is that most people are at pre-contemplation and contemplation stage. And I think that I agree that lots of people are in different places, but generally, when it comes to improvement, we're designing things at action stage, when the reality is that most people are contemplative at best. And we know, and the kind of theory behind this says that we need to design our change efforts and our activities based on where people are at. So what I'd say is, like, when I look across the health and care system, about 90% of the tools that are available for us and the way that we go about change are actually designed for stage 4, the action stage. And and what's this mean in reality for us? Basically, it means that the tools that we're using are designed at the action stage, and they're not effective for the stage of change that most people we work with are at, because they're pre-contemplative or contemplative as best. And when people are pre-contemplative or contemplative and we're trying to get them to take action, it's very hard to engage them. And therefore, it's very hard to get them to make the change that we want. So we start calling them, we start putting resistor labels on them. And people who are pre-contemplative or contemplative will get very irritated, defensive, and irrational. And then we start to question ourselves, because we feel powerless in our ability to lead or facilitate the change. And I want to give you an example here, which is the surgical checklist. And the surgical checklist came out of some really wonderful work that was done in the USA. And what was happening was that surgical teams in the USA were able to show through research that if they followed a surgical safety checklist and carried out these 3 stages of activity, So signing in, time out and sign out around surgical procedures, around every surgical procedure, first of all, they found that there was much less harm for patients, and also fewer patients died. So what happened is that it was brought to England and Wales, and what happened was that surgical teams were told, you have to implement the surgical checklist. So the initiative was at stage 4. So in a sense, people were told, teams were told, and NHS organisations were told, you have to take action. And it was mandated through targets, you have to do it, you have to take this action. So even though there was a compelling case for change and good data around it, most people in surgical teams were at pre-contemplative or contemplative stage. So they resisted it because it didn't connect with their values, because they were being told to do it when they were contemplative or pre-contemplative. And it's very interesting. If you look at a lot of the research studies that are coming out now about the implementation of the surgical checklist, what they tell us time and time again is that an awful lot of people did the task and missed the point. So, what we tend to do in these kind of scenarios, like that one, where we're going straight into the action stage, and even though we as change agents might not want to go straight into the action stage, the leaders in our organisations are asking us to go straight to the action stage. What we tend to do is to lower our ambitions, to find the people who are already at the action stage and work with them. And then we start to put these horrible labels on people who aren't yet at the action stage, like blocker or resistor or laggard or in denial. And then what happens is, because nothing's happening, we then blame the management. Well, you should be making people do it. And I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. I'm a very big fan of George Bernard Shaw quotes, as you know. And he says, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. And I think this is particularly relevant in this context where, we're thinking that we've done the communicating, okay, and we want people to take action. But the reality is we've done nothing like the communicating that we need, for things to happen. And again, going back to Maxine's story, when you look at the 50 hours of narrative that happened, what's that doing? That's moving people from being pre-contemplative to contemplative for ready for action. Another thing I was just going to say is that of these 5 stages, there's one stage that is a stage that we need to put a lot of effort and energy and really focus our change agents on. But very often we take the resources away from that stage. Which stage is that? You put it in the chat box. Yes, want to have a go? Yeah, Sebastian and Colin and Mark have got it right. It's 5. It's maintenance. So, we've just encouraged a group of clinical colleagues to make a change, and they've changed their process, but it's still very tentative and people can go backwards. So what we want them to do is to maintain it and go on and sustain it and go on from strength to strength. But what do we do instead? We take the support out and go on to the next action. So what should we do? And again, this really ties in, I think, with the big themes from this morning. So the things that we talked about in terms of impact and intent, the messages that we heard in Maxine's stories as well. Really listen and understand where colleagues are at. Appreciate what their starting point is, and elaborate interest. Let's find some common goals here. Let's find some common interests. How can we build meaning and conviction into the stage? Because in a sense, if we want somebody to move from a stage 1 or stage 2 onwards, then it has to be meaningful. We have to roll with resistance, and there's no point kind of arguing and talking at people. And what we need to do is to encourage people to elaborate. Why are they resisting? And again, I can just hear in my head Maxine's story, and I can just think about what must have been happening in those 50 hours of narrative, and there was a lot of this going on. We need to understand what makes it so hard for people and what would help, and we need to build shared purpose. And the final thing I wanted to say was that in the study guide for Module 3, there's a really great worksheet, and what it does it takes us stage by stage through each of the 5 stages in the model. And what it says is, you know, if I'm the person at that stage, how am I feeling? And then the second column is what should change agents be doing to support people in that stage? And the third column is what does the end of that stage look like? So I just took some examples here from the worksheet. Again, this is in the study guide. So at stage 1, you know, pre-contemplation, sort of like, no, not me, you know. People that are at this stage, I'm not thinking about changing my behaviours or my action or my work processes. And so the problem or issue that the change is trying to solve is right outside my frame of awareness, you know, or my perceived needs. So the second column, you know, what should we be doing as change agents when we're working with colleagues that are at that stage? You know, the focus should be on creating awareness for me, the person that's pre-contemplating around the need for change. And again, in the workbook, it sets out a whole range of different actions and things to try. And really important point here, you know, remember at this point, the goal isn't to make me, the pre-contemplative person, change immediately and move to action, because that isn't going to work. The goal here is to help me move to contemplation. Okay. So that's the end of my input. I hope that you know, you've found that useful, and that this may be a model that you'll want to use. And again, in the study guide, we've put a lot more references and other materials for using this model. So at this point, I'm going to move swiftly on to Jenny, because I think that our panelists are waiting, poised to make this real. So Jenny, panel session.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. I'm here with a different hat on today, because I'm usually here talking to you about Twitter, but it's really nice to be here doing something different. We've heard a lot from Helen already today, and a powerful story. I know most of you agree, certainly from Maxine, about resistance and how we think about it. And we thought it would be really helpful to hear from some of you about some of your experiences. So before the seminar today, we invited a few of our learners to share some of their experiences with you. And Linda, I'm putting you on standby because we're going to come talk to you first of all. Linda McKechnie is up in Scotland, and so we've got a good selection of panellists from all over the world, in fact. So going north from here first of all. And my first question is about the stages of change. So Linda, if you could start off by just telling us a little bit about the change that you're currently working on, where you're seeing resistance, and having heard what Helen's talked about, where you think some of your resistors might be at, which stage they might be at. You just need to unmute. There you go.
Can you hear me?
We can, loud and clear, Linda.
Okay, good morning everyone. First of all, I hope everyone can understand.
Oh, hang on, Linda's just been muted again. Let's just, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yes.
Okay, good morning everyone. I was just saying, I hope first of all everyone can understand my accent, so I'll do my best.
It's a lovely accent.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, when Jenny asked me to contribute to the panel this morning, I thought long and hard about a change process that we are currently going through, and I've picked one which is very live and very challenging for us at the moment, and that is around part of our work on the dementia care pathway entails asking our community mental health nurses and our dementia link workers to consider having initial conversations with people around end-of-life care. Now, it's a particularly emotive subject, as you can probably work out. The reason for us proposing this change as part of our national standards for care pathways, and there is an expectation that in the early stages of diagnosis that we do start to initiate these types of conversations. Now, I'm aware that this might be nothing new for people that work in different fields of health and social care, but for mental health nurses in particular, I think this is something that's quite new for them and something that they find particularly difficult, as I'm sure other people do. Anyway, in terms of where we're at with that change process, this has been going on for about 3 years now. A number of our staff, I would say, are very much still in the pre-contemplation stage. A number of them have probably moved to the contemplation stage, and I'll explain a wee bit about that now. We did go through, I suppose, your traditional change management processes, and early on, around 3 years ago, when we realised that we needed to start working on this particular change, we implemented some of the usual processes in that we took people off to education sessions, gave them lots of information, talked to them a lot about the evidence base and the need for change, and what a difference it would make to patients, carers, etc. Brought experts in to do some training around palliative care, etc. However, that probably succeeded in making people aware that this was an issue they needed to consider, but did little in terms of pushing us into the action stage, never mind the planning stage. I suppose for me at the moment, we're having to kind of take almost a few steps back. As I say, we've been trying to implement these changes for around 3 years, and I think there is an absolute recognition now that the resistance, if we can describe it as that, is primarily around people's own anxieties, people's own emotions, people's own fears. And I have to say that this is, it's been certainly an unusual situation for me, in that normally when I'm trying to push forward some changes, I tend to have a bit of knowledge, a bit of understanding, and can kind of bring people along with me. However, in this particular situation, I'm in exactly the same position as the staff, and that it's something that I would particularly find really, really difficult. So I think in order to relate to their feelings, one of Covey's models, as you know, is about first seek to understand, and I most definitely understand the position that our staff are in on this one. What we've done since then, we had a meeting only yesterday, and that's why I picked this particular topic. We had a very, very good meeting with some of the staff yesterday, acknowledged a lot of the anxieties that are around this subject, and what we've done is that we've realised that instead of us trying to support staff, instead of me and my team trying to support staff in this issue, we are not the experts in this area. So what we've done is that we're going to ask some of our oncology colleagues and some of the Macmillan nurses to come and try and help us to work forward in this, and to help us with the planning and the preparation, and to support the staff, because me and my team have never experienced this ourselves before, and so we need to bring in some other people to help us with that. I think in terms of, when I was reflecting on this last night, I think in terms of a boat rocking analogy, I think that what I've been doing is I've been sitting in the boat and rowing very, very vigorously against the tide on this one. And actually, I think what I've now done is I've looked under the seat and I found an engine. And I think that I need to start using the engine, and the engine are other colleagues who know more about this than I do.
Brilliant. Great, thank you, Linda. And that takes us right back to some of the earlier learning from our modules about not trying to do this on our own, and finding the right friends to make the journey with us. So thank you so much for that. So John, I'm putting you on standby now. John, I think, is up in Chester, so we're into England now. And John, same for you. Tell us what you're up to, what you're working on, and how it's going, and where some of the people are at in terms of the stages of change model.
Hi there. Yeah, mine's a kind of reflective view on something that I was involved in rather than kind of currently doing. But firstly, I'd just like to say that here in Chester there's been a number of us taking part in the kind of radicals, and that actually when I sign in, just sign in under my name, but there's been like 4, 5, 6 or 7 of us in the room all kind of studying at the same time. So I think it's important to kind of note that there may be others that are working kind of collaboratively around this.
So John, you're radical to the power of 7, are you?
Yes, we certainly
great.
are.
We love that.
Yes, good. And we're all trying to multitask as well with Twitter and everything else, which is good. So mine was I guess a challenge that some people will be currently facing or will be facing in the future, which was around kind of trying to manage a program of change around integrating long-term conditions program. So it was about working with multi-stakeholders and partners, local authority, acute, CCGs, and bringing those together to agree on a process to move forward around the integration of care around long-term conditions. Now, interestingly, on my very first day, because I was brought in to manage the kind of program, which I think may be the precursor to kind of failure. And I don't like to use the F word, failure, but because there is no failure, there's just kind of learning. But on my first day, I arrived to start program managing, and the board was there to formally interview me, and they had a set of structured questions in which I kind of panicked a little bit, to kind of defaulted back to what I know really well and what I believed in, which was talking to them about how we were going to do this as a collective, as a unit, about working together, about having a shared purpose and a shared vision for achieving our goals. And actually this kind of leveled the room, so all the kind of technical questions they had around LTC, around integration, or my historic position, all kind of just faded away, and people kind of bought into this notion that actually this idea and this vision that we had to have, that by working collaboratively around this, by sharing a vision and putting the patients at the heart of our change, was the only way forward. I think, in essence, we were able to bring that board together around this common goal, and we had agreement across the system. I think what I didn't mitigate for was maybe kind of hidden agendas in this, and that people's motives across this initiative were maybe kind of different and not aligned. So overtly they were saying yes, they agreed and we needed to do this, and they believed and subscribed to the shared vision, but actually underneath they had conflicting priorities around cost improvement plans, around workforce strategies, around a number of things that were obviously influencing their decisions and shaping their ability to achieve our kind of common goal. And I think as their positions become more entrenched and people disagreed, they defaulted to their historic positions, and I think organisational artefacts came into play, and in a sense I kind of lost my way here and got sucked into that. So sorry.
John, just thinking about, because it's a really complex situation that you're describing, lots of stakeholders from lots of different organisations, and I don't know how familiar you would have been with the stages of change model at the time, but given all of that complexity and the potential for all those different agendas, does the stages of change model help in that situation, and how might it help, do you think?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, I think, you know, everyone was clearly, overtly, everyone was clearly at 4. Maybe some people were at 3, but the reality of it was they were at stages 1 or 2, and I think we've seen that through the chat conversation. No, I guess it's difficult when people are saying they're where they are, but actually the reality is they're not sure about where they are.
How did you unpick that with them? So how did you kind of, not necessarily say we need to go backwards here and start again, but how did you get them to go on the right journey with you?
Well, unfortunately, that's something I wasn't able to achieve, and I think you know it's been, you know, the learning in this has been exponential for me, because, you know, as the clock ticked and time pressures kind of pushed people forward, I was trying to pull people back around the kind of the shared purpose, but also getting into some of the organisational artefacts about a case for change, and then defaulted into pulling together evidence and research and best practice, and this is what we should be doing. So kind of got caught into that and lost my kind of way, almost lost my faith in the process.
Okay. Thank you, John. I'm going to move on to Helen now. Helen Sanderson, a different Helen. And welcome this morning, Helen. I don't actually know where you are today. Where are you?
I'm in not so sunny Stockport.
Ah, okay. So you're also quite a long way further north than us. So Helen, talk to us about a piece of change that you're working on at the moment. I know you are, I see you as a very insightful person. I've seen lots from you on chat and lots from you on Twitter about some of the theories behind change. So I'm interested to hear what you think about the stages of change and how you've used it and something that you've been working on.
Thank you. Mine is very current. It's about my NHS Change Day pledge, which is supporting 1,000 healthcare colleagues and patients to have one-page profiles. And I started this in December after meeting with Helen, and I know we've got 2 weeks to go, so there's a great sense of urgency in being able to move this forward. But the only means I've got to do this is through social media. So I've been trying to connect and engage with a variety of different communities on Twitter. And it's been both exciting and very challenging. And it's wonderful seeing the chat boxes, because I'm recognising the names of some people who've been in touch with me who have developed their own one-page profiles. So that's brilliant. But I have experienced a bit of resistance, and it's the kind that Jerry Smale describes as people who are thinking they're doing it already, and it's just more of the same. So I guess in the context of the change model, that's people in the pre-contemplative stage, stage 1. And I had tweets from a couple of nurses who said that they were using hospital passports and kind of, there's really no need for one-page profiles. This is great. Or already using it. It's fantastic. So I tried to engage them in discussing this a bit through Twitter. I think it's not an either-or situation, that both can be really, really powerful. So I tried to engage them, but I went too far, too quickly, and a bit clumsily, because I did that by asking them whether they'd be interested in doing a joint blog with me about hospital passports and one-page profiles. And the Twitter stream went cold. So I couldn't engage them anymore, and I realised I'd made a bit of a blunder. And I was trying to do this as a way of listening to them and hearing what they thought about it, and trying to hear their perspectives. So my next tactic this week was to see if I could find another learning disability nurse to engage with. And 2 days ago, one followed me. So I asked her over Twitter whether she was using hospital passports, and she said that she was. So I started to talk to her over Twitter about how she found them, how they worked, what they were finding was really good about them. And we got a few retweets, and a couple of other people joined in. And then I asked her whether she'd be interested in exploring it in a bit more detail with me, and whether we could move to emails and have more detailed conversations. And we started to do this. And I think the end result is we've committed to a blog to explore it together. And it felt like progress, because I wanted and I needed an opportunity to learn more about what this perceived resistance to one-page profiles was, so that I could think about myself and how I was presenting one-page profiles, and a way to be really clear that, again, I think both are very, very powerful. And I think I've made some progress, because yesterday I was delighted to be invited by We Learning Disability Nurses to be part of a Twit chat about this very thing. So that feels really exciting to me, because I've then got an opportunity to have conversations with a much wider community and explore this in more detail. So my learning...
thank you.
So
go on, Helen, sorry.
I was just going to say, my learning is to find ways to really listen and engage with people who appear to be resisting, and to recognise that it's very likely to be my style of approach, as well as the potential content of what I'm trying to achieve, which is supporting people to do one-page profiles, and how important dialogue is. Thank you.
Great insight to end us on. And just before you go, Helen, I know you've aimed high with this. Tell us what your pledge is and where you're up to so far.
Thank you very much. So my pledge is 1,000 one-page profiles, and we're at 860. And this morning I had a tweet from Sue in Cornwall, who said they're doing a session for NHS Change Day, and they're hoping to get a couple of hundred people there. So I'm really hoping that we can meet our 1,000 target. And if anybody's interested, please tweet me and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Fantastic, and I'll put your Twitter handle in the chat box to make that easier, Helen. So I'm going to end with an apology, because we also had Deborah on standby in Los Angeles, and we've eaten up all of our time, and to leave enough time for the reflection at the end, we're going to hand back over now.
Yeah. But what we'll do is we'll have Deborah on next time.
We will, so forgive us please, Deborah.
And now we're handing over to Liz.
Okay, thanks very much. So we're drawing this session to a close. So I'm going to just put Tony on standby for some very brief final comments from Twitter. So Tony, are you up to speak?
I am indeed up to speak. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you go.
Good. What I've been observing as I've sat and watched the Twitter chat through the second half of the WebEx, I've been seeing I've been seeing participants essentially surfing on the crest of the wave of the module of the program. So what I'm seeing is stuff which is coming through from earlier modules about humanity and understanding who they are, from understanding who the other people in the system are. I've seen stuff which is looking forward to future modules, to the next module, in that we're seeing people really valuing models of change and explanations, really valuing the openness and honesty of change leaders and change agents. And I think that ties in with another really important message coming through, which is that diversity is important, and diversity and inclusion rather than discrimination and us and them. So just connect.
Great, thanks very much, Tony. And I'll do just a very brief summary of the chat for the second half. Lots of important comments around the intent and impact stuff. But interestingly, still lots of very social things going on. So people inviting other people to events, people inviting other people to connect, people requesting other people's contact details, lots more resources, and some really lovely quotes coming up. And a huge amount in terms of the reaction to Maxine's story. So I'd like to thank a few people. I want to thank Maxine and Pip for their session. I'd really like to thank Jenny and her panel, John, Linda, Helen, and huge apologies to Deborah, because we're also mindful of the fact that I think it's about 3 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles. Very thanks to everyone for all your tweets. You took us through the 100,000 pledges on this module. Quite a couple of people posted that, and thanks for posting that on chat. So just a couple of reflections in terms of key messages. A lot of stuff for me that really resonated was the importance of transformative conversations and this whole thing about enabling people to connect and reflect together. I also reflect on the importance of diversity and its role in change, but critically its role in innovation, and that came through very strongly for me. But to kind of go into the last bit, the stages of change model, and linking back to the rolling with resistance concept, and this lovely idea that resistance is a perspective, it's not a position. And this was role modelled so well by Maxine's story. But what she also did was she took us back to the previous 2 modules and the importance of narrative and its impact. And I'm reflecting on the importance of how we must continue to tell and retell our stories, and not just to engage others, because they're a critical vehicle for reflection as well, and that came through very strongly for me. And finally, a quote which Carolyn put up about halfway through the session today. Tell me and I will forget. Show me I might remember. Involve me and I will know. So, our calls to action for campaigns for this week. So we're saying to you, we'll post these or similar actions as a pledge on the NHS Change Day pledge wall. The URL is there. I will reflect deeply on how I operate as an agent for change. I will consider the impact of my communication and behaviour beyond my intent. I will listen to others' views, engage others in change, and help others through the stages of change. So take some time to have a think about those, and think about either pledging those or something similar. And our next opportunities for learning, Wednesday the 19th of February from 4 till 5 British time. We have the tweet chat, hashtag #SHCRchat. Please do join us. And finally, our next module, which is Friday morning, the 21st of February, Module 4. The 21st of February, Module 4, Making Change Happen. We will be reaching out to you to get some more participants, because I think it's really valuable when we get extra perspective sessions. So look out for next week later. And I'm now going to hand over to Pip, who's going to give us our reflections.
Thank you, Liz. So those of you who had the study guide, these questions are also included there. But we just would like to leave you with a few things to be thinking about during the week ahead, if you don't already have enough to think about. So we'd love you to focus on what resistance really means to you. And I think a good way of doing that is to reflect on the things that you resist, as well as your own responses to other people's resistance. We'd love you to think about how you work with resistance as a change leader, and I guess there may be some differences between your behaviour as an individual and your behaviour as a change leader. how can you make sure that the changes you make actually achieve the impact you desire so that they accomplish your intention? Because it's really easy for us to actually have a good intention, as Helen described, but really not quite have the impact that we actually want to have. So thinking back to the last couple of modules, also think about whether your impact is actually sustainable and whether or not it creates dependency, or does it actually generate self-efficacy in other people. Finally, think about who you're interacting with and where they are on the stages of change model, and you might like to think about how that understanding could actually influence the way that you work with those people. So thank you everyone for your enthusiastic comments and insights and for participating today. We hope you have a really good week ahead. We look forward to seeing many of you next Friday, and goodbye and good luck this week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.